Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope to help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. My usual co-host, Dave Burstein, is on travel, so I'm flying solo. But we have a very special guest in the studio with us today. Will Owen is the communications manager for the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, or STOP. In July 2020, Will graduated with distinction from Columbia University, my alma mater, and the London School of Economics with a dual MA and MS degrees in international and world history. Will received his BA in international relations and Spanish from Tufts University in 2014. Will, welcome to Community Technology.
Hi, Stu. Thank you so much for having Stop back on the show again.
Yeah, we're excited. Before you came on, I mentioned that we had Albert Fox-Khan, who I believe is the executive director of STOP, on the show a couple times over the last several years. And we've been just really impressed with the work that STOP is doing. But for our listeners and viewers who may not be familiar with your organization, tell us a little bit about the history and the mission of STOP, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. So, founded in 2019, the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, or STOP, is an organization that advocates and litigates to abolish local governments' systems of mass surveillance. Our work highlights the discriminatory impact of surveillance on Muslim Americans, immigrants, the LGBTQ plus community, Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities. And we particularly highlight the unique trauma of anti-Black policing. So here in New York, we are advocating for the abolition of police use of tools like facial recognition, geofence warrants, drones, and other technologies that are used to disproportionately surveil communities of color.
Mm-hmm. Now, I read that you guys have something called Stop Surveillance Summer going on related to NYPD here in New York. What is that all about, Will?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Stop Surveillance Summer is our month-long event series we are hosting throughout June, which sadly is just about over, to push back against NYPD's use of surveillance technologies. We've hosted a number of in-person events, actually, all outside, where we've condemned the use of facial recognition, geofence warrants, subway metal detectors, currently promoted by the mayor, and other forms of surveillance that disproportionately impact communities of color here in New York City. So we kicked off the Stop Surveillance Summer events with a rally at City Hall in early June, with elected officials and fellow civil rights organizations. And then we've also had a protest against facial recognition in Times Square, or mid-month. We had a spy-in just yesterday at One Police Plaza.
A spy-in?
A spy-in, yeah.
What is that? That sounds interesting.
So we joined some other organizations to turn the cameras back on the police right outside of NYPD headquarters, and carried signs to protest NYPD's surveillance tactics. And then tomorrow we have our last event, which is protesting police use of geofence warrants. So just for some background, geofence warrants allow police to request the location data of like a huge number of individuals, technically without a warrant. So that like those like geofence warrants can really have a scope as large as a whole neighborhood, to find the location data of anyone that they might be tracking. So tomorrow we are going to be hosting like a mock geofence warrant in Washington Square Park in the afternoon, to kind of show New Yorkers the threat of geofence warrants and location tracking.
Break that down a little bit for us, if you will, Will. I know we've talked about geofencing previously on the show, but just for folks who may have missed earlier shows, kind of break that down for us. As I understand it, it's a geographic area that's defined by the requesting agency or police department or whomever, and they request all of the electronic devices, IDs, and well, you break it down. I don't know. Give me the
Yeah,
details on what it
absolutely.
is.
No, I mean that was pretty much right. But so a geofence warrant, law enforcement can ask Google or any other tech giant really to identify everyone in a specified location. So those are from their devices, and that location can be, a single house or an entire neighborhood. Can really be used to track thousands of people at once. Um, and then reverse keyword searches, which is another concern of ours, allow law enforcement to identify every user of a device who searched for a specific keyword, phrase, or address. So both tools together, used by NYPD currently, create, just a digital dragnet that tracks thousands of people at once, and of course threatens communities that are most vulnerable to government surveillance, including immigrant, Black, Brown communities, Muslim communities, and queer communities.
Yeah, give us some examples, Will. I mean, it sounds a little theoretical when you describe it, but I mean, I know things like rallies, Black Lives Matter rallies, and other events where folks may just be attending or supporting. It's a way to collect data on where people are and at events, et cetera. Give us some real life examples as to how the police use it.
So a real life example that we are, really concerned about, especially in light of the repeal of Roe v. Wade, is that law enforcement would be able to use geofence warrants to track all, women or pregnant people who are near an abortion clinic based on their devices. So, like a real life example that we're very concerned we will be seeing is that tracking of just like all devices around any area that provides essential reproductive health services.
So, in other words, the geofence warrant would enable a law enforcement agency to get I guess they get the IP address or the phone number ID of everyone who is around, for instance, an abortion clinic or a reproductive rights center or a pregnancy counseling center. Anyone who might be in the area, they can grab their data. Is that?
Yeah, essentially, Google would be handing over that location data upon from law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Now, we use the word warrant. Is warrant actually required to get this data? Does law enforcement have to go to a judge before they go to Google to request this data?
So that is a question I would check in with some of my fellow colleagues on, especially as it might vary state by state.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the warrant allows law enforcement to simply ask for that location data directly from Google or from another big tech organization.
So there's like a blanket warrant?
Yeah, it's essentially, like just a really broad in scope blanket warrant that, just allows law enforcement to track just a huge number of people who are not even, people who are not considered suspects at all in any sort of crime. It's just kind of a blanket location-based warrant.
And I'd imagine that data that's collected on people within the geofenced area, that gets stored somewhere and probably get put in a database, and you may get identified with a certain group or with a certain issue or with a certain potential crime when you were just kind of passing through. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a major concern, which is why STOP has really just been pushing for a blanket ban on the use of geofence warrants and keyword search warrants just across New York City, just so that if organizations are not, or if companies are not collecting that data, not handing that data over to law enforcement, then that is kind of what we see as the simplest way to avoid such police abuses. So we've been working with State Senator Myrie and Assemblymember Dan Court to start the country's first ban on geofence and keyword warrants, which would also ban police purchases of geolocation data from commercial vendors. So it would be, one of the, it'd be like at least a harm reduction measure in a post-Roe world for anyone seeking an abortion in New York who is coming from out of state. So yeah, we're really hoping to just fully ban their use in New York, and we've been working on that for several years now. But the push for the ban has accelerated in recent months, and certainly after the repeal of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. We all have heard the headlines about the Roe v. Wade being repealed, and we don't know to what degree abortions or seeking abortions will be criminalized. I guess that's yet to be determined, and possibly on a state-by-state basis. But what do you see as the threat to women and families with geofencing and keyword search technology as it relates to Roe v. Wade being repealed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as you said, it's still, such a quickly evolving situation, and we will see, just how far anti-choice states might go in pursuing anyone who has sought out abortion care. But I mean, the repeal has only exacerbated our concerns of how location tracking tools may be used against anyone who needs abortion care, which we outlined extensively in our most recent report, the Pregnancy Panopticon, which is on STOP's website. But with these, with potential use of geolocation warrants, keyword search warrants, we know that the criminalization of abortion and use of location tools will harm communities of color and low-income communities the most, making the essential procedure even more inaccessible to those communities that have already, had such difficulty in a lot of ways, receiving care, receiving abortion care. So yeah, like that location tracking becomes, another layer, or sorry, the criminalization of abortion becomes another layer of potential, location tracking of communities of color, of Muslim communities.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned several times keyword search. Explain to our audience what that is. But what is keyword search, and why do we need to be concerned?
Absolutely. So a keyword search, allows law enforcement to seek out data on anyone who has searched for a keyword on Google, and that's another thing that they would, or other search engine. And they allow, law enforcement to identify every user who has searched for a specific keyword, phrase, or address. So it's kind of another, digital dragnet alongside the issue of geofence warrants. That's certainly a concern when it comes to Roe v. Wade, where, anyone who might be searching just more information on medically medically accurate information on abortion care. Anyone who might be searching anything pregnancy related could be at greater risk of tracking through keyword warrants.
So well, how does this work? So if I'm on my computer, and I'm worried about maybe my teenage daughter, and I want to search birth control methods and things that are available to help with birth control. If I put in birth control in my search engine, does that flag me for some possible warrant and gathering of data on me?
Yeah, I mean, it is a risk for sure. And it's a risk that law enforcement, it's a tool that law enforcement have used in the past, and something that we do fear will only accelerate the ability to just simply search within an area, who has sought out or who has searched anything related to pregnancy or abortion care. So it's kind of another way in which police can use digital tools to simply flag a really wide array of people.
Wow, this sounds kind of frightening. Now, earlier you mentioned that law enforcement had the option to purchase geofence and keyword search data from providers. Is that a different process from the so-called warrant, and how does that work?
So I mean, it's I guess the issue of big tech companies collecting that data and housing it, and then having the ability to sell it. I think in terms of location data, again, I'd have to maybe double check with some of my colleagues on the exact process of how that might differ, how the purchases might differ from the geofence warrant itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's it's certainly a concern in police contracts, seeking out location information from private vendors. So yeah, again, I can look into more of the kind of nitty gritty of the actual process. But in New York, we're hoping to just outright ban the police's capability to even purchase that sort of data, which
Wow.
unfortunately is not banned at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So the legislation that you're proposing would outlaw not just the warrants, but also the purchasing or any other way of acquiring this type of private data. Is that
Exactly
characterization?
Yeah, it's really kind of a three-pronged legislative approach with the geofence and the keyword warrants, and then also just simply the ability of police to purchase that data from commercial vendors.
Hmm. Now, who would a commercial vendor be? Who would that be? Just like Facebook, or who is a typical vendor that would have that data?
So yeah, I mean, certainly, all of the big tech vendors, also, just, I think, lots of different ad tracking, vendors, really kind of the concerns that we see with something like Meta or Facebook, housing that data and then being able to distribute it, is really the fear. And then beyond that, of course, we are concerned about all of the police contracts with private surveillance vendors, and that kind of collusion between the public and the private spheres. STOP is mainly focused on abolishing public surveillance, police surveillance, but we do some advocacy against the more commercial surveillance capitalism that we see from some of the big tech companies.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So now has STOP's focus, I know you talked about the New York City legislation. I think a city, not state. Is that right, that you're proposing, or is it both?
It's actually both for the geofence and the keyword warrants. Yeah.
Are there other efforts around the country similar to what's going on here? And the stops focus primarily in New York, or is it regional or national?
So STOP is primarily focused on New York. I think a lot of the wider anti-surveillance efforts that we've seen do run parallel to STOP. But in a lot of ways, New York needs to catch up to other cities that have banned tools like facial recognition, for example. But the geofence, the bill against geofence warrants, keyword warrants, is actually the first in the country. And STOP is, while we are always eager to support fellow organizations around the country, we're also very cautious of parachuting in and disrupting the efforts of people who know their communities the best, know their cities the best.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're talking with Will Owen, who is the communications manager with the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, STOP. We're going to take a brief break and be back. You're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Community and Technology with Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. This is Community and Technology with Stu Reid and special guest today, Will Owen, Communications Manager with the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, or STOP. I want to talk a little bit with you, Will, about facial recognition technology. There's been a lot of chatter about it. Folks probably have a general sense of what it is. I know on our show we've had folks that have come on and talked about how it has a very poor track record of reading Black and brown faces, particularly female Black and brown faces. But tell us about your experience with it and how you see it being used and or abused here in New York City.
Yeah, absolutely. So STOP is advocating similar to our work on geofence warrants, just for a full-scale ban on the use of facial recognition technology, which is used, widely here in New York City. I'd have to double check the numbers, but the number of cameras is really astounding that have facial recognition capabilities. I want to say it's around 20,000 across the city, across the five boroughs. According to a study recently done by Amnesty International, their Decoders project. Maybe don't quote me on the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it's right around that 20,000. Mm-hmm. We are, really, like many, concerned by the inaccuracy of the technology, the way in which it does not, correctly, the way the scans do not correctly identify Black and brown faces, as you said, particularly Black women's faces. But even if the technology were to supposedly work better, we're not interested in any, improvements to facial recognition. We would like to see an outright ban because we know that the technology is disproportionately used to target communities of color. We know that facial recognition is also used in a very undemocratic way. It was used here in New York to target Black Lives Matter protesters. So we again are very much committed as an organization to an outright ban in New York, and we would like to see New York catch up to other cities around the country like San Francisco or Boston that have banned the technology.
Have they banned it outright? Will, tell us a little bit about those cities and what they've done, if you can.
Yeah, so they've banned police use, at least, of those technologies. I'd have to double check on any sort of, private uses. Facial recognition is used in the private sphere as well. But yeah, they have banned facial recognition to be used by police, and that's something that we would really like to see done here in New York.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that there may be 20,000 or more cameras in New York City that employ facial recognition. Are those police cameras or those municipal cameras? Do you know who owns and or controls those cameras?
So there is, so the cameras could either be, municipal or privately owned, and privately owned, cameras that have facial recognition capabilities. Amnesty's project was really sweeping and identifying, all cameras that could potentially have facial recognition across the five boroughs at every intersection. So it could be there are a variety of different vendors too that have facial recognition cameras. STOP did a project mapping Hikvision cameras specifically. That's one private vendor. So we have a map of those on our website. But yeah.
Well, what is your website? Well, you mentioned that a couple of times. Share that with our listeners, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. I encourage everybody to go. It's stopspying.org. And we have a lot of different educational resources on facial recognition, geofence warrants, a whole set of reports as well, information on our our legislative and litigative advocacy. So yeah, definitely encourage everybody to check it out.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you know, is there any, you talk about the pending legislation on geofence warrants and keyword search warrants. Is there any such effort underway regarding facial recognition technology and use of cameras in the city in that regard?
Yeah, so that is something that we've been working on for a long time. It's been, kind of stalled in the city council and the legislative bodies. But it's something that we are tirelessly working on to hopefully have passed. We would love to see it passed this year, although it has been kind of slow moving on the yeah, city council side.
Mm-hmm. I know from some other folks that have been on the show that facial recognition technology is concerned not just for abuses by law enforcement, but also by private uses. I know some building developers and owners and managers are using it to control and monitor access to buildings. And talk about that and how that could be potentially problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the use of facial recognition on like in housing, especially in lower income housing, is very problematic and very much a concern, especially when you think about how landlords or anyone who owns a building might collude with law enforcement in their use of facial recognition technology. It is certainly something that we've seen and are very concerned about as well.
Mm-hmm. And aren't housing managers also using it for access and tracking control of their tenants? Is that another area of concern?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, access. Also, when it comes to low income housing in particular, you have to wonder like to what extent, is the tool simply being used to police tenants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, just to switch gears a little bit, I know there's been some talk recently about something going on with AT&T and 911 technology. Can you share with our audience what the issues are on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, definitely a need that we recognize that the 911 system needs to be updated. In a lot of ways, it's kind of stuck in the 90s and really like better suited to landlines than to cellular devices. And AT&T in particular has been working to become the first wireless carrier to roll out location-based routing for 911 calls. The company would be using like a device's GPS location, the GPS location of a caller. So unlike how 911 calls have worked all these years, instead of routing calls based on the location of a cell tower, with that GPS location, they could find a device, or they could, find a location within 50 meters of a device. So, it's obviously much more accurate. And there is a huge issue in terms of 911 calls still being routed to cell towers that could be miles away from where an emergency is happening. But it's a really complex issue. Like we want to see improvements to 911 calling and routing that could help EMS save lives faster and respond that much faster to emergencies. But we also are highly concerned about how police may misuse the location data that could be collected through 911 calls.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. Well, on its face, one would say, "Oh, okay. Well, 911 needs to know where that call is coming from in order to effectively respond to an emergency. Maybe the person can't speak. Maybe the person doesn't know exactly where they are. you kind of at first blush you'll think that makes sense, but how is it abused or potentially abused?
Yeah, so I mean, it's in a way like another option for potential location data and location tracking of communities that are already over surveilled, over policed. I mean, AT&T has stated that it won't track device locations. It will only be used during an actual emergency call. Um, but I mean, this still raises a lot of concerns, especially our reliance on 911 in the first place has contributed to a lot of the over policing and police violence that we've seen towards Black communities, towards brown communities. Um, and 911 has really in a lot of ways perpetuated a lot of the carceral logics we use to address um, emergencies like mental health crises when a disturbance is reported. So I mean, I feel like that's kind of a much broader issue and broader concern, just 911, the use of 911, and just having police sent to address crises where they might harm more than help. Um, but again, it's a complex issue because, as you said, like there is a need for locations to be found faster. But then there are other concerns that have been raised surrounding 911, especially for Apple users, where they might have their medical information already uploaded on their phone, and that's we fear is that information that could then be shared with law enforcement, with emergency responders, that maybe it would be helpful in a medical emergency, but also we just don't know how the data may be used, and down the line we don't know who will necessarily have access to it when we know that cell phone data has been so poorly protected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I mean, is the 911 tracking, is that something that can be turned on and off, or is it automatically activated when the 911 call is made, or is there some concern that it could be activated in a non-911 situation?
So my understanding is that it's something that is activated just during a 911 call. At least that is how AT&T has been promoting it, or has been hoping to develop it. But I'm honestly not sure how it might be activated otherwise, or how the data could be found beyond within those calls.
Mm-hmm. Are other carriers besides AT&T looking at developing or using this technology? Do you know, Will?
I believe there are several others. I think I saw that T-Mobile was as well. Again, I'd maybe want to double check that, but I'm pretty sure it's not just AT&T, but AT&T has spearheaded the effort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're talking with Will Owens, who's a communications manager with Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. What are some of the other things, Will, that STOP is looking at and studying, and that maybe we and our listeners should be concerned about?
So I mean, we really are working on a whole host of issues, I think, right now. However, especially just in light of the repeal of Roe v. Wade, I think that is like our main focus, and really advocating for the digital privacy of women and anyone capable of becoming pregnant has become one of our top of mind issues right now. Yeah, I'd say that's we are always advocating all sorts of anti-surveillance against surveillance abuses. We've also advocated against police use of drones drones, which can also have facial recognition and several other technologies. But I'd say right now, especially with the publication of our report, The Pregnancy Panopticon, we're really focused on just all of the potential ways that surveillance could expand in a highly undemocratic way post-Roe.
I had not even kind of contemplated the Roe v. Wade repeal and how that is going to impact potentially privacy issues. That could be a huge issue for so many people, women and families across the country.
Exactly, especially with Roe being based on the 14th Amendment, being such an important constitutional right to privacy that also informed many other areas of privacy. We fear just this really wide erosion of privacy rights in the post-Roe era. And beyond simply criminalizing abortion, we're really concerned about the ways that the repeal criminalizes pregnancy, in and of itself. And we're seeing the U.S. turn the clock back 50 years when it comes to women's rights, but now we have this arsenal of digital technologies in the 21st century to enforce abortion bans. And when it comes to criminalizing pregnancy more broadly, we fear the way in which the tools, the way in which surveillance technology might flag anyone who has had a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy, in which case of course abortion is necessary. Like the ban on abortion in and of itself is absolutely abhorrent and a horrible rollback on civil rights, but it has so many implications that are so broad and so beyond the procedure itself.
Wow. So what can regular folks do? Is there anything that you'd recommend that people can do in terms of maybe contacting their legislators or supporting STOP? What are some of the things that regular folks can do to help combat some of these privacy issues that you've raised?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we encourage folks to contact their legislators as much as they can in promoting any bills that protect privacy. On the STOP website, you can find quite a few different resources in terms of reaching out to New York specific legislators. We also encourage all to join events STOP is putting on, look at the events being put on by other privacy rights organizations, such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation or the Digital Defense Fund, other organizations working against surveillance abuses. When it comes to Roe v. Wade, there's digital defense will never really replace the constitutional right to abortion that was hard fought for and enjoyed for 50 years. But there are methods of digital defense that providers and patients can use to stay safer online. So in terms of that specific issue, I'd be happy to talk more about that if you'd like to hear more.
Yeah, go ahead, please do.
Okay, great. So, I mean, we really encourage abortion providers and institutions to immediately conduct, privacy audits of their electronic communications. And then back to big tech, we really want to see big tech simply stop collecting data that could put women or pregnant people at any sort of risk. That's really the easiest way to mitigate harm, if they just simply don't have the data stored, don't have the data to share with law enforcement. Late last month, STOP welcomed a letter sent by 40 Democratic senators and representatives that called on Google specifically to delete individualized location data that police may use to enforce abortion bans. That's kind of looking specifically at geofence warrants and Google's complicity in geofence warrants. So that, is a measure, a harm reduction measure that could definitely help in the future, or at least we hope could help. Otherwise, or companies like Meta, Facebook, and WhatsApp, sorry, all those companies within each other because they're all Meta, need to implement much more foolproof end-to-end encryption. We're also concerned in terms of big tech, the risks of the data that's stored in Apple's iCloud and potential law enforcement access to that, and lack of protection. And then, also in terms of big tech, just, retailers like Amazon, we strongly encourage to better protect the purchase data of people who may be purchasing anything related to pregnancy. Otherwise, there are some other modest protections that we as individuals beyond the larger big tech can take. Again, these are very modest protections and don't replace a constitutional right to abortion. But we do encourage anyone who is pregnant or anyone who may be seeking an abortion or looking up information about abortion care to use VPNs, virtual private networks that do obscure your location. Unfortunately, they run the risk of the VPN operator cooperating with law enforcement or commercializing data. Always using messaging tools that have end-to-end encryption. Signal would be the one that we recommend first. Anything that enables you to auto delete or make your messages disappear automatically. Those are some of the tools some of the approaches individuals can take. I know that you've probably seen a lot of talk of period trackers and concerns surrounding surveillance through data collected by period trackers. Those are, a really important tool for many, but there is, a risk that those could become government watchdogs that track cycles and, there's a concern that those could become a repository of all information surrounding pregnancy.
Okay, well, give us your website again, Will. There's so much information here that we've been talking about. I'd like folks to be able to visit your site and just kind of review and delve into some of the issues that STOP is dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that these are complex issues and many issues that we've addressed. The website is stopspying.org. You can also find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook at Stop Spying NY. We'll be sharing more of our work there and more tools, especially in this fight to protect reproductive health care.
Mm-hmm. Are there any final thoughts or words you'd like to leave with our audience?
I know that this has probably all sounded really dystopian and really upsetting, and I know we're in very upsetting times. But I think that something we are all very encouraged to see is the organizing and the outrage against police abuse of surveillance technologies, against the repeal of Roe v. Wade. So I'd like to end on a note of hope that there is a lot of movement and a lot of really innovative work being done to mitigate and hopefully fully end one day abuses of police surveillance technology.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Will. We've been speaking with Will Owen, who's the communications manager with STOP, the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Stu.
Okay, this has been Community and Technology with Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Thanks.